Ethan West survived the battlefields of Iraq through explosions, sleepless nights, and memories that refused to let go. He believed that returning to a quiet, small town would mark the end of the war. But in the scorching 39-degree midday heat, in a deserted parking lot in Millbrook, a faint cry rang out, and Ethan realized that fate was placing before him another battle, more brutal than any he had ever faced. The Greyhound bus eased to a gentle stop at the Millbrook station at exactly 11:47 a.m. The thermometer hanging outside the grocery store read 39 degrees Celsius, 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Ethan West stepped down from the last stair, a green military backpack slung across one shoulder. He was 32 years old, 6 feet tall. On his left cheek ran a small scar stretching from the cheekbone to the chin, a remnant of an explosion in Mosul in 2019. A soldier had come home, but the war was still there inside the nightmares that jolted him awake at 3 a.m, in the crack of fireworks that sent him diving to the floor, in the guarded look in his eyes whenever someone came too close. Ethan returned to Millbrook, the hometown he had left 14 years earlier, not out of longing, but because he no longer knew anywhere else to go. The Pine Motel sat at the far end of Main Street. "Hello there," a warm female voice called out. Helen Grant, the motel owner, 58 years old, brown hair streaked with grey, wearing a floral apron, stepped out from the back room. She looked at Ethan, her eyes lighting up. "My lord, Ethan West, isn't it? Thompson's boy, Jake." Ethan nodded, slightly surprised. "Yes, ma'am. You remember me?" "How could I forget? You helped me fix the fence when you were 16. Helen smiled, her expression softening as she noticed the scar on his cheek. She handed him the key to room 7 and said gently, "You're home now, Ethan. Everything's going to be all right." Ethan took the key, his throat tightening. "Thank you, ma'am." Millbrook was a small town of 8,000 people, surrounded by cornfields and low hills dotted with oak trees. Main Street stretched only 3 blocks. A grocery store, a cafe, a barber shop, a small church, a gas station. Everyone knew everyone. It was the perfect place for a wounded soldier like him to heal. But he wasn't used to it yet. Every sound made him flinch. Every shadow behind him made him turn around. That day, at 12:15 p.m., Ethan was walking past the Brookfield Market parking lot to buy food, just like anyone else. Then he heard it. A small, weak, intermittent sound like a kitten crying. Ethan stopped, raised a hand to shield his eyes from the sun, and looked around. No one. The sound came again, clearer, closer. He turned and walked toward a shadowed corner of the parking lot, where an old black SUV was parked tight against a metal fence. He stepped closer. The windows were clouded, coated with a thin layer of dust. He bent down and looked inside. His heart nearly stopped. A baby girl about 1 year old was lying on her side in the back seat. Her face was flushed, her cheeks turning a purplish red. Her mouth hung slightly open, lips cracked and dry. Her tiny hands were clenched, trembling in spasms. Sweat soaked her pink shirt, her hair plastered to her forehead. "No," Ethan whispered, then shouted, "Is anyone here? There's a baby trapped in a car." No response. The supermarket was 50 meters away. Not a single person nearby. Ethan yanked the door handle. Locked. He slammed his hand against the window harder, then harder still. The glass didn't break. A memory crashed into his mind. A collapsed house in Mosul, the cries of a child buried under rubble. He had dug with his bare hands, ignoring his own injuries, just to reach that baby before the air ran out. "Not this time," Ethan said through clenched teeth. He stepped back. Scanning the ground, an old brick lay near the concrete curb. Crash! The window shattered. Glass sprayed outward, raining onto the seat and the floor. Ethan reached inside, ignoring the shards, slicing into his skin, unlocked the door, and pulled it open. A blast of scorching air rushed out like a furnace. He leaned in and pulled the baby girl against his chest. Her body was tiny, feather-light, but burning hot. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. He held her tight, turned, and ran. "Help me! There's a baby who needs emergency care." Ethan sprinted across the parking lot and onto the sidewalk. A woman standing outside the pharmacy gasped and pointed. "Millbrook Clinic, West Corner." The glass doors of the Millbrook Clinic flew open. Ethan rushed inside, gasping. "Emergency! The baby has heat stroke." 2 nurses spun around in alarm. A woman in a white lab coat, Dr. Emma Wright, ran out from the back, her eyes widening at the sight of the baby in Ethan's arms. "Put the baby here, quickly," Emma shouted as a nurse wheeled out a gurney. Ethan laid the child down and stepped back. Temperature 40.2 degrees Celsius. Nurse Diane, the head nurse, blonde, in her 40s, called out. 30 minutes passed. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, the emergency room door opened. Doctor. Emma stepped out, removed her mask, and looked at Ethan. "You just saved a life," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. 10 more minutes, and the baby wouldn't have made it. Ethan exhaled, his knees going weak. "Is she going to be okay?" "She's stable. We'll continue to monitor her." Emma glanced at the cut on his hand. "You're injured." "It's nothing." Ethan shook his head. Nurse Diane came over, bandaging his hand, and asked gently, "What's your name?" "Ethan West." "Where are the baby's parents?" Ethan was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "I didn't see anyone. She was alone in the car." Deputy Shaw, a young police officer, arrived to inspect the scene. He returned to the clinic and handed Ethan a clear evidence bag. "We found this in the car." Ethan looked inside a small piece of paper, the handwriting shaky and uneven. "Please keep the baby safe. We will come back. We're sorry." Ethan frowned. What kind of parents prepare everything for their child and then abandon her? He murmured. Shaw shrugged. "We're investigating." The next morning, Ethan received a phone call at 7:15 a.m. A low, serious male voice spoke on the line. "Mr. West, this is Sheriff Daniel Cross. We need you to come to the police station to give an official statement." The Millbrook police station sat on Main Street, a 2-story red brick building. "Mr. West, thank you for coming. Please, step inside." The interrogation room was small, white-painted walls, a metal table, 2 chairs facing each other. Ethan sat down, his back straight, a habit from his military days. Cross took the seat across from him and opened a notebook. Another man entered, Detective Harris, 38 years old, brown hair, wearing a light blue shirt, his gaze sharp and observant. "Detective Harris will be taking notes," Cross said. "Can you walk us through everything that happened yesterday, in detail?" Ethan took a breath and began from the beginning. Harris wrote continuously. Cross stared directly into Ethan's eyes, as if searching for cracks in the story. "Do you know the baby's parents?" Cross asked. "No." "Have you ever seen that SUV before?" "No." "Why did you break the window instead of calling the police first?" Ethan met Cross's gaze. "Because there was no time. The baby was getting weaker by the minute. I couldn't wait." Cross gave a slight nod, but suspicion lingered in his eyes. Ethan felt the pressure as if he were being examined, his motives questioned. Still, he remained calm. He had endured far harsher interrogations on military bases. An hour later, Harris escorted Ethan back to the Brookfield Market parking lot. The black SUV was still there, now surrounded by police tape. A forensic technician named Allen, a young man wearing glasses and a white lab coat, was examining the vehicle. "Find anything?" Harris asked. Allen looked up. All fingerprints were wiped clean, no vehicle paperwork, but, he pointed to the back seat. The child safety seat was properly installed, carefully done. 2 containers of infant formula, new, high quality, Pampers diapers, the expensive kind, clean baby clothes, neatly folded. Harris frowned. "This doesn't look like a typical case of child abandonment." Ethan stepped closer and looked inside the car. He noticed a small pink blanket folded neatly on the seat. A tiny teddy bear was caught under the seat belt. Someone had prepared carefully. Someone had loved this child. "Something isn't right," Ethan said quietly. "I can feel it." Harris looked at him. "You think so too?" Officer Ryan, a young patrol officer, ran over holding a tablet. "Detective, we checked the store's security cameras, but there's a blind spot. We only caught a blurry image of a man parking the car around 11:30 a.m. No clear face." Harris exhaled. They knew how to avoid the cameras. That afternoon, in Sheriff Cross's office, handwriting expert Mrs. Chen examined the note. "The handwriting is shaky," she said, pointing to the strokes. "Signs of extreme stress." The writer was panicked, afraid, but they tried very hard to write clearly. Each letter was deliberately made large and legible. Cross asked, "Can you estimate the age?" "Approximately 25 to 35. Likely a younger person, not accustomed to writing much." Harris reread the note aloud. "Please keep the baby safe. We will come back. We're sorry." "We," Harris emphasized. "That suggests 2 people, possibly the parents." Mrs. Chen nodded. "And the apology, this isn't casual. It's a heartfelt apology. Cross remained skeptical. Or it could be a tactic to throw us off. Harris shook his head. I don't think so, Sheriff. They didn't abandon their child. They were trying to protect her. The news spread like wildfire. That afternoon, reporter Lisa, a local TV journalist with red hair, wearing a blazer, stood outside the supermarket, filming. A 1-year-old baby girl was left in a car under 102-degree heat and nearly died of heat stroke. Fortunately, a veteran discovered her and saved her in time. The child's parents have not yet been located. Lisa later went to the Pine Motel and knocked on Ethan's door. He opened it, saw the camera, and stepped back. Mr. West, could you share how you felt when you saved the baby? No, Ethan said curtly, and closed the door. On local radio, Mark, the deep-voiced host, commented, Parents like that don't deserve to raise a child. Leaving a baby in a car in extreme heat, that's cruelty. Callers phoned in, divided. Some agreed they should be punished. Others were sympathetic. Maybe they were desperate. Maybe they had no choice. The next morning, Grace, a 35-year-old social worker with neatly tied brown hair, wearing a blue cardigan, came to the hospital to meet Dr. Emma. The baby needs temporary care while we continue the investigation, Grace said. I have a couple the Thompsons very experienced with infants. Emma nodded. I'll arrange it. Just then, Ethan walked in. He was holding a bouquet of yellow tulips bought from the flower shop on the corner. Grace and Emma looked at him, surprised. I wanted to see the baby, Ethan said, a bit awkwardly. Emma led him to the observation room. Lily lay in a small crib, sleeping peacefully, breathing evenly. Her face had regained its healthy color, no longer pale like the day before. Ethan stood there, watching, feeling a strange connection as if this child held some piece of his soul. Then suddenly, he turned to Grace and Emma. I want to be her temporary guardian. The room fell silent. You, what? Grace asked. I want to take care of her until her parents are found, Ethan said seriously. I know I'm single. I don't have experience raising a child, but I saved her. I want to make sure she's safe. Grace shook her head. Mr. West, it's not that simple. We need background checks, psychological evaluations, a home assessment. I'm ready, Ethan said. An hour later, an emergency meeting was held at the police station. Sheriff Cross slammed his hand on the table. Absolutely not. We don't know anything about this man, Detective Harris countered. He just saved the child's life. That has to mean something. Pastor Cole, a 60-year-old minister with silver hair, dressed in black, stepped in. I've known Ethan West since he was a boy. He's a good man. I'll vouch for him. Grace thought for a moment. We'll conduct an evaluation within 48 hours. If there are no issues, I'll issue temporary guardianship under strict supervision. That night, Ethan signed the temporary guardianship papers in Grace's office. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote his name. Dr. Emma stood beside him, watching, smiling softly. Do you realize what you've just done? She asked. I do, Ethan replied, but I can't walk away from her. The soldier had returned home not just to rest, but to find his purpose again. And perhaps Lily was exactly the reason Ethan needed. On his first night caring for Lily, Ethan slept only 2 hours. Mrs. Helen helped him set up a crib in the room, a worn but sturdy old crib, lined with soft white sheets. Ethan placed Lily inside, tucked a light blanket around her, then sat on the bed watching her sleep. Everything seemed peaceful, until 1 a.m. Lily began to cry. Ethan jolted awake and rushed to the crib. Her face was red, her little arms flailing. He picked her up, but Lily kept crying. He laid her down. She cried even harder. He held her again, rocking gently, still crying. Please, Ethan whispered. What do you need? Panicking, he called Nurse Diane. Her voice was sleepy but patient. Have you checked her diaper? She might be hungry. Mix 120 milliliters of formula, warm, not hot. Test it on your wrist before feeding her. Ethan followed her instructions, his hands shaking as he measured the formula, as carefully as if he were assembling a complex weapon. Lily drank a little, then turned her head away. He changed her diaper awkwardly, taping it on crooked. Then he tried to rock her back to sleep, softly humming a tune he couldn't remember ever learning. At 4 a.m., Lily finally fell asleep again. Ethan sat slumped on the floor, his back against the wall, eyes bloodshot. The next morning, Mrs. Davis, the neighbor in the next room, a woman in her 50s with grey hair, knocked on the door, holding a tray of cookies. "Dear, I heard the crying last night. Do you need some help?" Ethan nodded, exhausted. "Mrs." Davis stepped inside, looked at Lily in the crib, and smiled. "Let me show you." She taught him how to hold a baby properly, one hand supporting the head, the other under the hips. How to tell the difference between hunger cries short, rhythmic cries with hand-sucking, wet diaper cries constant fussing, cries for comfort those just needed holding and gentle rocking. Ethan learned like a dedicated student. He memorized each step, practiced every movement. That afternoon, Dr. Morgan, a 48-year-old psychologist with short brown hair and round glasses, came for an evaluation. He sat across from Ethan, observing how he interacted with Lily. "Do you understand what you're facing?" Dr. Morgan asked gently. "I do," Ethan replied. "Caring for a baby isn't easy. Not just that, you have PTSD. Taking care of Lily may help you rediscover a sense of purpose, but it can also create pressure and potentially make things worse." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then looked at Lily sleeping. "But I feel calmer when I'm with her." Dr. Morgan nodded. "That's a good sign, but you need to promise to see me once a week. We'll monitor this together." Meanwhile, Detective Harris continued his investigation relentlessly, traveling throughout the area and interviewing witnesses. At Joe's tavern, Joe, the 52-year-old owner with a beer belly and thinning hair, recalled, "3 nights ago, a young couple came in. They sat in the darkest corner, looked scared, kept glancing at the door. The woman was holding a large bag. I heard a baby crying inside it." "Did they say anything?" Harris asked. "Not much, just ordered drinks." The man paid cash, didn't take his change, and left in a hurry. At the gas station, Mike, a 25-year-old attendant in a blue uniform, pointed to the security footage. "That black SUV. I remember it." The man filled up, paid cash, barely spoke. He looked extremely nervous. At a motel on the edge of town, George, the elderly owner, flipped through his guest log. They rented a room for one night. Didn't use their real names. Just wrote, Smith. By morning, the room was empty. Harris pieced the clues together. The couple was on the run. They avoided cameras, used cash, left no trail. But why? From grainy security footage, technicians identified basic features. The man was about 28, tall and thin. The woman around 26, with long brown hair. Both appeared exhausted. The breakthrough came when Harris traced the purchase of the SUV. Susan, a bank employee, provided surveillance footage. This man withdrew $8,000 in cash. We're required to report large transactions. From the footage, Harris identified the face and ran it through the database. David Bennett, age 28, an accountant at Kane Logistics. Wife, Claire Bennett, 26, a preschool teacher. Daughter, Lily Bennett, 1-year-old. "Finally, we have names," Harris said with relief. Harris and Officer Kate, a young female officer, drove 200 miles to the Bennett's apartment. The building was old, paint peeling. The landlord, Mr. Brooks, a thin man in his 60s, met them at the door. "They haven't paid rent in 3 weeks, Brooks complained. "I was about to evict them." "We need to go inside," Harris said. Brooks unlocked the door. It creaked open. Dust covered everything. But inside, the apartment was orderly, no signs of chaos or struggle. Family photos hung on the wall, David, Claire, and Lily smiling in front of a Christmas tree, baby toys neatly arranged, books lined up on shelves, but the laptop, phones, and important documents were all gone. "They didn't run because they were poor," Harris said to Kate. "They were running from someone, and they took everything essential with them." Kate looked around. But who were they running from? The conference room at the Millbrook police station was packed. Sheriff Cross sat at the head of the table, Detective Harris beside him with his notebook open. Mayor Collins, the 55-year-old mayor with slicked-back grey hair, wearing a navy blue suit, sat with a worried expression, and there was a man no one recognized. Brooks was 42 years old, 6'1", broad-shouldered, wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, an FBI badge clipped to his belt. His eyes were sharp as blades, his voice low and steady. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said. "I'm Agent Brooks with the FBI. I'm investigating Vincent Kane, the head of the largest criminal organization in this region." Cross frowned. "Kane? We've heard the name, but what does he have to do with baby Lily?" Brooks opened his laptop and projected an image onto the screen. "Kane Logistics, a transportation company that appears legitimate. In reality, It's a front for Kane's smuggling and money laundering operations. David Bennett worked as Kane's accountant. 3 weeks ago, David contacted the FBI, saying he had evidence of illegal activity, but before we could meet him, David and his family disappeared. Mayor Collins let out a slow breath. If Kane knows the baby is in Millbrook, our town could be in danger. Brooks nodded. That's exactly why I'm here. Harris studied the file. Who are they? Brooks clicked to the next image. 2 men, one large and bald, Marcus, the other thin, blonde, Troy. These are Kane's enforcers. They've made a lot of people disappear. Cross's jaw tightened. And now they're looking for David Bennett? Yes, Brooks confirmed. Meanwhile, at the Millbrook Public Library, Ethan sat in front of an aging computer, composing an encrypted email to Jackson, an old army friend who now worked in cybersecurity. Jackson, I need you to look into someone named Vincent Kane, as detailed as possible. Ethan. An hour later, Jackson replied, Ethan, you're getting into something extremely dangerous. Kane is not an ordinary man. Ethan typed back, I know, but I need the truth. For Lily. 10 minutes later, a zip file arrived. Ethan downloaded it and opened it hundreds of pages of documents. Kane's operational history, a list of victims, an organizational network spanning 3 states. The more Ethan read, the colder he felt inside. David and Claire weren't just running. They were fleeing someone capable of erasing an entire family without a trace. Miss Harper, the elderly librarian, approached quietly. Are you all right? You look awfully pale. Ethan nodded weakly and closed the computer. 3 weeks earlier, on the 12th floor of Kane Logistics headquarters in a major city, David Bennett sat in front of his computer under flickering fluorescent lights. It was already 11 p.m. Everyone else had gone home. He was reviewing the quarterly accounts. That's when he noticed irregularities. A $5 million transfer into an unnamed account. Then another $3 million. Then $7 million more. Source: unknown. David dug deeper, opened hidden files, followed the money trail. Offshore accounts, weapons transactions, money laundering from illegal sources. His hands trembled as he copied all the data onto a small USB drive. He pulled it out, slipped it into his jacket pocket, shut down the computer, and hurried home. Claire, his wife, 26 years old, with soft brown hair, was feeding Lily dinner when she saw David's pale face. Are you okay? David took her hand. Claire, I've discovered something terrible. The company I work for, they're doing illegal things. Claire looked at the USB drive. We need to go to the police. David shook his head. No, the police could be bought. We have to go to the FBI. 2 weeks later, back at Kane Logistics, Randy, a young IT specialist, noticed an alert on the system. User D. Bennett accessed top-level secure files at 11:14 p.m. Randy immediately reported it to Miss Lee, the office manager. She called Kane. Kane's voice was ice-cold. David Bennett? He knows too much. An hour later, Marcus received a call from Kane. Find David Bennett. Recover the USB. Eliminate him and his family. Marcus, the large, bald man, called Troy. We've got a job. Near midnight, Marcus and Troy arrived at David's apartment. David was asleep when a strange noise jolted him awake. He looked out the window, 2 masked figures, holding something in their hands. Claire! David shouted. Run! Take Lily and go now. Claire grabbed Lily and fled out the back door. David followed, clutching the USB drive tightly. Marcus kicked the front door open just as they vanished into the night. Ethan went to the temporary FBI office in Millbrook, a small suite inside the municipal building. Brooks looked surprised when he saw him. Mr. West, what are you doing here? I need to know about Vincent Kane, Ethan said bluntly. Are David and Claire still alive? Brooks frowned. Where did you get this information? I have my own sources, Ethan replied. I need the truth. For Lily. Brooks studied him for a long moment, then sighed. We're looking for them. But so is Kane. Ethan clenched his fist. Do they have a chance? If we find them before Kane does, yes, Brooks said. Brooks stood and looked out the window. Mr. West, you're caring for the daughter of 2 people being hunted. If Kane finds out where Lily is, I'm a soldier, Ethan said. I know how to protect. Brooks turned back, his expression grave. This isn't a battlefield, Mr. West. This is a shadow war, and Kane plays by no rules at all. Vincent Kane's private office sat on the top floor of the Kane Logistics building, a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Antique paintings hung on the walls, Persian rugs covered the floor, and a liquor cabinet stood stocked with expensive bottles of whiskey. Kane sat behind a walnut desk, dressed in a dark blue suit, his hair slicked back, fingers tapping lightly on the desktop. Marcus stood across from him, the tall, broad-shouldered, bald man in a black leather jacket. "Mr. Kane, the baby has been found in Millbrook, a small town about 200 miles from here. A former soldier named Ethan West is serving as her temporary caregiver." Kane looked at the computer-screen photos of Lily from the local news and an image of Ethan standing outside the clinic. His eyes were cold as ice. "Proceed with the original plan. Find David and Claire. Recover the USB. Eliminate them." Marcus hesitated. "What about the baby?" Kane met Marcus's gaze. "Silence her. No witnesses." Marcus nodded and turned to leave. Just then, the door opened and Miller stepped inside, a 38-year-old Millbrook police officer in uniform, his eyes avoiding Kane's. "Mr. Kane, I have information." Kane gestured for him to sit. Miller pulled out a file. "Ethan West, 32, former soldier, recently discharged, currently staying at the Pine Motel. Sheriff Cross trusts him, and the FBI is providing protection." Kane smiled thinly. "Eliminate him as well, if necessary. And Miller, you'll be well compensated." Miller swallowed, nodded, and hurried out. 2 weeks earlier, David and Claire began their flight. They stayed in cheap motels, never using their real names, always paying in cash, avoiding cameras. Once, David tried to contact the FBI, arranging a meeting at a park. But when he arrived, he spotted Marcus standing in the distance and recognized him immediately. "Run!" David grabbed Claire, and they disappeared into the crowd. At a highway rest stop, Marcus nearly caught them. Stan, a kind-hearted truck driver, saw their panic and quickly opened the back of his truck. "Get in here." They climbed inside and lay among the cargo. Stan closed the door just as Marcus came running up. By the second week, things were worse. Lily became ill, running a low fever, crying more often. Claire held her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Our child is suffering because of us." David squeezed her hand. "We'll get to the FBI. Everything will be all right." But every time they tried to approach an FBI office, they noticed unfamiliar cars following them. They had to change direction and keep running. Money began to run out. They dared not use an ATM. Kane could trace it. George, the elderly motel owner, noticed their struggle and let them stay 2 nights for free. "I won't ask questions," he said, "but I can see you need help." Amy, the diner waitress, secretly brought them leftover food. "Don't tell my boss," she whispered, "but the baby needs to eat properly." The night before they left Lily behind, Marcus and Troy located the motel. David looked out the window and saw 2 figures approaching, holding something in their hands. His heart pounded. "Claire, we have to go now." Claire clutched Lily, trembling. "What do we do?" David grabbed his wife's shoulders and looked straight into her eyes. "If we're caught with Lily, all 3 of us won't survive. But if we leave her somewhere safe, good people will find her." Claire shook her head violently. "No, are you crazy? Leave her behind." David took her hands, his voice breaking. "This is the only way she lives. We leave her in a crowded place, with cameras. Someone will save her. We'll come back when it's safe." Claire held Lily close, tears soaking her daughter's face. "My baby, I'm so sorry. I love you more than anything." They fled out the back door, got into their car, and drove into the night. The next morning, they bought a used SUV with their last remaining cash. They parked it in the Millbrook supermarket lot, a busy, safe place. David wrote the note, his hands shaking so badly his writing came out uneven. Claire carefully prepared diapers, formula, and clothes, each item placed with care, as if packing for a long journey. Claire placed Lily in the back seat and kissed her forehead one last time. "Mummy will come back for you, I promise." They left the car and hid at the far edge of the parking lot, watching. Time passed. 30 minutes. 1 hour. Claire trembled. "Why hasn't anyone noticed yet?" David checked his watch anxiously. "It's too hot. Our baby." Then they saw Ethan, the man in the grey t-shirt, approach the car. Ethan smashed the window, lifted Lily into his arms and ran. Claire collapsed in tears. "Thank God." David held her tight. "We have to go. Marcus will be here soon." In the present, at the Pine Motel, Pastor Cole knocked on Ethan's door. Ethan opened it, surprised to see the minister. "Pastor Cole?" Cole stepped inside, looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, then turned back to Ethan. "My son, I've heard you're involved in something very dangerous." Ethan closed the door. "I'm just taking care of a baby." Cole shook his head. "But people are looking for her parents, and they're not good people." "I'm not afraid," Ethan replied. "I fought in Iraq." Cole placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "A battlefield and this are not the same, my son." In the days that followed, Ethan noticed strange signs. A black sedan parked outside the motel several times. A stranger asked Mrs. Helen, "Is someone named Ethan West staying here?" Mrs. Helen refused to answer and immediately warned Ethan. Ethan called Brooks. "Someone's watching me." Brooks's voice was low and firm. "Stay calm. I'll assign protection. Don't go out alone." That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the parking lot. Lily slept soundly in her crib, unaware of the danger closing in. Once again, the soldier felt as though he were back on the battlefield. But this time, he wasn't fighting because of orders. He was fighting for an innocent child. And 200 miles away, Marcus was preparing his gear, checking his equipment. He looked at the photos of Lily and Ethan and smiled coldly. The hunt was about to begin. The abandoned vehicle yard lay on the outskirts of the city, 80 miles from Millbrook. The building was dilapidated, its tin roof riddled with holes, brick walls peeling, weeds growing wild all around. David and Claire Bennett were hiding in the darkest corner, both thin and exhausted, their clothes filthy after 2 weeks of non-stop running. Claire sat curled up on a piece of cardboard, hugging her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. "How is our baby now?" she asked, her voice choked and trembling. David sat beside her, wrapping an arm around his wife. He had lost weight too, his beard overgrown, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. "She'll be okay. That soldier, I have a feeling he'll protect her." Footsteps echoed. Both of them flinched, ready to run. But it was only Jerry, a homeless man around 60, with messy grey hair and a worn coat holding a plastic bag. "I brought you some bread and water," Jerry said, handing it to them with a gentle smile. David accepted it, his voice breaking. "Thank you, sir. We don't have any money to pay." Jerry waved him off. "It's all right. You look like good people who've fallen on hard times. I know what that feels like." Claire opened the bottle and drank quickly. David broke the bread in half and gave one piece to his wife. They ate in silence, the bread dry and coarse, but it was their first meal in 24 hours. David pulled out an old laptop lent to him by Jerry and opened his email. His hands trembled as he typed, "We are David and Claire Bennett. We have evidence against Vincent Kane. Please help us." He attached part of the files from the USB, enough to prove the truth, but not everything, and pressed send. Claire asked weakly, "What if the FBI doesn't get here in time?" David took her hand. "Then at least they'll have proof to arrest Kane. Our daughter will be safe. That's what matters most." They sat there, waiting. 1 hour, 2 hours. The laptop screen remained empty. Claire leaned her head against David's shoulder and whispered, "Do you think she misses us?" David kissed his wife's forehead. "She will. And we'll see her again. I promise." At the temporary FBI office, Brooks received a new email alert. He opened it, skimmed rapidly, then called out to Carter, the tech specialist. "Carter, check this attachment immediately." Carter downloaded and analyzed the file. 5 minutes later, "Agent Brooks, it's real. This is solid evidence against Kane arms trafficking, money laundering. It's all here." Brooks slammed his hand on the desk. "Trace the IP address. Find them now." Carter's fingers flew across the keyboard. The email was sent from a public internet cafe, 80 miles from here, but they've gone offline. Brooks stood up and shouted, "Mobilize the team. We've got one chance. Move out now." Meanwhile, in a dark street corner, Snake, a gaunt informant with a deeply lined face, stood waiting. Marcus pulled up in a black sedan and stopped. Snake climbed into the back seat and handed Marcus a phone. "I've got photos. Bennett's hiding in an old vehicle yard on the east side." Marcus studied the image. David buying supplies at a nearby grocery store. "You sure?" Snake nodded. "I followed him, 100% sure." Marcus called Troy. "Assemble the team. Tonight, we finish this." "How many?" Troy asked. 6, full gear." Marcus's phone rang. Kane. "Marcus, remember to get the USB first." "I need it," Marcus replied coldly. "Yes, sir. I'll clean it up." At the Pine Motel, Ethan was feeding Lily dinner when Sheriff Cross knocked on the door. Ethan opened it and saw the grave look on Cross's face. "What is it, Sheriff?" Cross stepped inside and lowered his voice. "Brooks just called. Kane knows you're caring for the Bennett's daughter. There may be an attack." Ethan clenched his fist. "He's coming here?" Cross shook his head. "We don't know, but we'll protect you. I've stationed 2 officers to guard the motel all night." Ethan asked. "What about the baby's parents?" Cross sighed. "The FBI is searching. Let's hope they're not too late." Night fell over the vehicle yard. David and Claire sat in the darkness, moonlight filtering through holes in the tin roof. Claire suddenly whispered, "Do you feel it? Like someone's coming?" David felt it too, an unease he couldn't explain. "I do. We should move." But it was too late. Headlights appeared in the distance, shining straight toward the yard. David looked out 5, maybe 6 vehicles approaching. "Run!" David grabbed Claire, and they rushed to the deepest corner of the yard, hiding behind stacks of old tires. Marcus, Troy, and 4 others stepped out of their vehicles, flashlights in hand. Marcus swept the beam across the yard and shouted, "Bennett, come out! You've got nowhere left to run." Footsteps echoed. Lights scanned every corner. David gripped Claire's hand tightly, hidden in the shadows. He whispered, "My love, if I don't make it, live for our child." Claire shook her head violently, tears pouring down her face. "No, we'll live together. We have to see Lily again." And in Millbrook, Ethan suddenly jolted awake in his chair. He sat up, drenched in cold sweat. It felt as though something terrible was happening, a battlefield instinct he hadn't felt in years. He looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, then out the window. The night was pitch black, but inside him, a voice pressed urgently. "They need you. 3 o'clock in the morning." Ethan's phone rang sharply in the darkness. He jolted awake and looked at the screen. "Brooks, what's going on?" Brooks's voice was urgent. "We've located David and Claire, but Kane has found them too. They're surrounded at an old vehicle yard." Ethan sat bolt upright. "Where exactly?" 80 miles from Millbrook. My team is on the way, but we're at least 40 minutes out." Ethan glanced at the clock. 40 minutes is too long. They won't survive that. Brooks warned him. "Mr. West, don't do anything reckless. Let us handle this." But Ethan had already hung up. He looked at Lily sleeping peacefully in her crib, then pulled on his jacket and grabbed his car keys. Ethan called Jack Morrison, his closest friend from the military. The phone rang 3 times. "Ethan? It's 3 in the morning. Why are you calling?" Jack sounded half asleep. "I need you. Right now." Something in Ethan's voice snapped Jack, fully awake. "What's happening?" "2 people are about to be killed. I need to get to them. The enemy is an organized crew, well armed." Jack was silent for a second. "Location?" Ethan gave him the coordinates. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Jack said. "I'll call Tyler and Preston." Ethan then called Dr. Emma. "I have to leave. Please watch Lily for me." Emma sounded worried. "You'll come back, right?" Ethan looked at Lily one last time. "I promise." Once again, the soldier went to war not for orders, not for money, but because it was the right thing to do. He carried with him the belief that every life was worth saving. An open lot on the outskirts of Millbrook, 345A. 3 vehicles converged. Jack Morrison stepped out first, 35 years old, tall, solidly built, short brown hair. Tyler Reed, 33, lean, with eyes sharp as a hawk's. Preston Cole, 36, broad-shouldered, heavy beard. All 3 wore black jackets and carried gear bags. Ethan spread a map across the hood of his car. "The vehicle yard is here. Enemy count is approximately 6, fully equipped," Tyler asked. "And we're 4 people with limited gear," Preston replied calmly. "But we've got combat experience. They're just hired muscle." Jack looked at Ethan. "What's the plan?" Ethan pointed at the map. "Tyler takes the high ground to the east best vantage point. Preston and Jack approach from the sides. I go in head-on and draw their attention." Officer Ryan, the young cop, ran up, out of breath. "I heard it on the radio. I want to help." Sheriff Cross followed close behind, pulling on his jacket. "I can't let civilians risk their lives alone. I'm coming too." Ethan's team reached the vehicle yard at 4:30 A. The sky was still pitch dark, with only faint moonlight. Tyler climbed onto a nearby abandoned building and scanned the area through binoculars. He saw Marcus interrogating David. "Where's the USB?" Marcus shouted. David shook his head weakly. "I don't have it. I already sent it to the FBI." Furious, Marcus shoved David to the ground. Claire screamed as Troy grabbed her by the hair. "Shut up," Tyler spoke into the radio. "6 targets. 2 hostages under immediate threat. Move now." Suddenly, blinding light Ethan switched on his headlights, flooding the yard. One of Kane's men turned around. Tyler fired a precise shot. The man went down. "Ambush!" Marcus shouted. "Fight back!" Ethan threw smoke grenades. White clouds filled the yard. He charged in, moving fast through the haze. Jack and Preston advanced from the sides. Noise echoed, flashlights sweeping wildly, shouts and confusion. Troy raised his weapon toward Claire. Ethan lunged forward and kicked hard, sending it flying from Troy's hand. The two fought hand to hand. Troy swung. Ethan dodged, countered with trained military moves, twisting the arm, throwing him down, locking him tight. Troy collapsed, unconscious. Marcus saw the tide turning and ran. He fired at a gas tank. Flames erupted, blocking the path. Ethan charged through the fire and chased him. Marcus jumped into a car and started the engine. Tyler fired from afar. The tire blew out. The car skidded and slammed into a wall. Ethan caught up, yanked the door open, and dragged Marcus out. Marcus pulled a knife and stabbed toward him. Ethan dodged, twisted Marcus's arm bone, cracking audibly. Marcus screamed and dropped to his knees. "Don't hurt me." Ethan looked at him coldly. "I don't hurt prisoners, but you will pay." FBI vehicles roared in, red and blue lights flashing. Brooks jumped out with his team and took Marcus and the remaining men into custody. Troy was unconscious. 3 others were wounded and no longer able to resist. Paramedic Linda rushed in and treated David and Claire. Claire trembled, tears streaming down her face. "My baby, where is my baby?" Ethan knelt and looked her straight in the eyes. "She's safe. She's waiting for her parents." David grasped Ethan's hand, choking up. "You saved my entire family." Ethan shook his head. "I just did what was right." Brooks took the USB from David and held it firmly. "This evidence will bring Kane down. Mr. Bennett, you did it." Sheriff Cross clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "You accomplished the impossible." Jack smiled and pulled Ethan into a brief embrace. "Just like the old days, huh, brother?" Ethan gave a tired smile. "Right now, I just want to go home to Lily." As Ethan's car drove away from the vehicle yard, the first light of dawn broke across the horizon. Golden sunlight pierced the clouds, illuminating the road ahead. A new day, a new beginning, and hope for a family about to be reunited. At dawn, Vincent Kane's mansion was completely surrounded. A SWAT team dressed in black body armor and fully equipped sealed off every angle. Captain Barnes, the team commander, gave the signal. They smashed the door. "FBI, open up!" Kane woke to the thunderous noise. He stepped out onto the staircase, still wearing a silk robe. The front door burst open. Barnes entered and held up a warrant. "Vincent Kane, you are under arrest for smuggling, money laundering, and conspiracy to cause harm to others." Kane remained calm, offering a cold smile. "Call my lawyer." They cuffed Kane and escorted him outside. FBI Director Walsh, a silver-haired man in a black suit, was waiting in the courtyard. "Mr. Kane, we've been waiting for this day for a long time." At the same time, FBI agents conducted a thorough search of Kane Logistics headquarters. They discovered hidden ledgers concealed in a safe, transaction records, and lists of partners. Brooks took the USB David had provided and cross-checked it. Everything matched perfectly. Kane looked at Brooks, his tone mocking. "You think you've won? I have the best legal team money can buy." Brooks replied coolly. "But you don't have David Bennett anymore, and this USB is now in my hands." For the first time, concern flickered in Kane's eyes. At the Millbrook police station, Sheriff Cross was reviewing the case files when he noticed suspicious messages in the system. Miller had been feeding information to Kane. A $50,000 transfer had been deposited into Miller's account. Cross couldn't believe it. "Miller's worked with me for 10 years, but the evidence was undeniable." Cross summoned Miller to his office. As Miller walked in and saw Cross's expression, he knew he'd been exposed. "Sheriff, Silence." Cross cut him off. Cross personally put the handcuffs on Miller. "You sold your soul for money." Miller lowered his head. "I have a family to support. They paid me $50,000. Cross shook his head, heartbroken. "And you betrayed everything we ever stood for." Miller was led away to a holding cell. 2 weeks later, a preliminary hearing was held at the county courthouse. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, townspeople, and Kane's victims. Judge Morrison, a 58-year-old judge with grey hair, wearing a black robe, presided. Kane sat at the defendant's table in a dark blue suit, his expression icy. Prosecutor Linda Hayes, a 42-year-old woman with neatly tied brown hair, addressed the court. Your Honor, we have clear evidence of Mr. Kane's crimes. This USB contains records of illegal transactions, arms trafficking, and money laundering from multiple sources. David and Claire were called as witnesses. David described discovering the fraudulent books, being hunted, and having to leave their child behind to save her life. Claire wept as she recounted the 2 weeks on the run. We had to leave our 1-year-old daughter in a car, hoping someone kind would find and save her. Marcus, now in custody, testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. Kane ordered me to find Bennett, recover the USB, and eliminate the entire family, he said. Mr. Stone, the 55-year-old defense attorney in a grey suit, attempted a rebuttal. These documents could have been fabricated. Testimony from someone seeking leniency is unreliable. But Judge Morrison shook his head. The evidence is overwhelming. The court orders Vincent Kane to stand trial. The gavel struck. Kane maintained his composure, but a flash of rage burned in his eyes. After the hearing, David and Claire were brought to Millbrook Clinic. The small room was filled with afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. Lily was playing with building blocks alongside Dr. Emma. The door opened. Claire saw her daughter's small face, soft brown hair, clear, bright eyes. David wrapped his arms around both his wife and child, tears running down his cheeks. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry we had to be apart. Lily didn't understand, only laughed happily. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching the reunion with a quiet smile. Claire noticed him, stood up, and walked over. Thank you, she said. Thank you for saving my child. Ethan shook his head gently. No, she saved me. Ethan stepped out into the hallway and sank onto a chair. Dr. Emma joined him and sat down beside him. What you did was extraordinary, she said. Ethan looked down at his hands. I just couldn't let anyone else be lost. You mean the war? Emma asked softly. Ethan nodded and spoke of the people he couldn't save in Iraq, fellow soldiers, civilians, children, the memories that had haunted him for years. Emma placed her hand over his. But this time, you did save them. You saved an entire family. Ethan looked at her and saw warmth in her eyes. Emma smiled. I think you should stay in Millbrook. This town needs people like you, Ethan replied quietly. I was thinking the same thing. News of Ethan spread throughout Millbrook. Mayor Collins announced, We are proud of our hero. Pastor Cole held a Thanksgiving prayer service at the church. Mrs. Helen cooked a large dinner and invited Ethan and the Bennett family. Townspeople came to the motel with flowers and gifts. Ethan grew embarrassed, his face flushing. I'm not a hero, he said. I just did what was right. That night, Ethan lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in many years, he didn't have nightmares, no explosions, no images of battle, only peace. At last, the soldier had found his peace. But the journey was not over, because ahead of him, a new future was waiting. 3 months later, the county courthouse was packed. The official trial of Vincent Kane, an event watched closely across the entire region, was underway. Reporters lined up outside the building, cameras set up everywhere. The people of Millbrook came to show their support for David, Claire, and Ethan. Kane's victims filled the back rows, waiting for justice. Kane entered the courtroom wearing an elegant black suit, his hair slicked back, his expression cold. He took his seat at the defense table, maintaining an air of arrogance. The 12-member jury, men and women of varied ages and backgrounds, sat solemnly. Miss Allen, the court clerk, recorded every detail. Judge Morrison struck the gavel. This court is now in session. Prosecutor Linda Hayes rose, holding a thick stack of files. Your Honor, we will prove that Vincent Kane committed serious crimes, arms trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to harm multiple individuals. Linda presented evidence from the USB drive, multi-million-dollar transactions, secret ledgers, and lists of illegal partners. Marcus was brought in to testify. He gave detailed testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. Kane ordered me to find David Bennett, recover the USB, and eliminate the entire family, Marcus said. I followed his orders. David took the witness stand and described discovering the crimes, being hunted, and having to flee. We had no other choice. If we hadn't run, our whole family would have been killed. Claire wept as she recounted the 2 weeks on the run. We had to leave our 1-year-old daughter in a car, hoping that someone kind would find her and save her. It was the most painful decision of my life. Mr. Stone, the defense attorney, attempted to push back. David Bennett could have fabricated the data. Marcus is testifying for leniency and cannot be trusted. But the evidence was overwhelming. The USB data matched the records found at Kane's offices. Multiple witnesses gave consistent testimony. Ethan was called to the stand. Linda asked, "Mr. West, did you know that Vincent Kane ordered harm against David, Claire, and Lily?" "Yes," Ethan answered, clearly. "I witnessed his men attempt to kill them at the vehicle yard." Stone objected. "Do you have proof that Mr. Kane personally gave those orders?" Ethan looked directly at the jury. Marcus testified to it. "And I believe him because I saw the brutality of Kane's organization firsthand. They hesitated at nothing. They showed no mercy, not even toward a 1-year-old child." Kane stared at Ethan, his gaze icy. Ethan met his eyes without fear. The two faced each other in silence, one representing darkness, the other light. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. On the charge of illegal arms trafficking, guilty. On the charge of money laundering, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to harm others, 12 counts, guilty. The courtroom fell silent. Kane showed no outward emotion, only clenched his hands tightly. Judge Morrison delivered the sentence. "Vincent Kane, you are hereby sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel struck once, twice, 3 times. Justice had been served. David and Claire embraced, sobbing. Ethan let out a long breath of relief. The crowd applauded. Kane was escorted out this time, stripped of his arrogance. Miller's separate trial took place a week later. He pleaded guilty and bowed his head in apology. "I made a terrible mistake. I'm sorry, Sheriff Cross. I'm sorry to the town." Judge Morrison sentenced him to 15 years in prison and stripped him of all law enforcement privileges. Marcus cooperated with investigators and received a reduced sentence of 25 years. Troy did not survive the confrontation at the vehicle yard. The remaining accomplices were sentenced to between 10 and 20 years. A month later, Millbrook held a ceremony honoring Ethan. The town square was decorated with banners and flowers, a large stage set up. Hundreds of residents attended. Governor Thompson came to present a commendation. Mayor Collins spoke first. "Ethan West is a symbol of courage and compassion. He has shown us that one person truly can make a difference." David and Claire stepped onto the stage with Lily. Claire spoke, her voice trembling. "Ethan didn't just save my child. He saved my entire family. He gave us the chance to live, to love one another." Lily waved to the crowd, grinning broadly. Ethan accepted the commendation, deeply moved. "I only did what anyone should do, help someone in need. Thank you, Millbrook, for welcoming me home." The square erupted in applause. David and Claire decided to stay in Millbrook. They opened a small bookstore, Bennett Books, in the center of town, a place that sold books, hosted reading clubs, and included a play corner for children. Lily grew up healthy and joyful, free from trauma. David worked as a freelance accountant, helping small businesses. Claire taught at the local preschool. They bought a small house with a garden, just 3 blocks from Mrs. Helen's motel. That evening, Ethan sat with David and Claire on their front porch. Lily ran around the yard with Button, the floppy-eared puppy they had recently adopted. The sun set, bathing the town in warm golden light. David asked, "What do you think you'll do next?" Ethan watched Lily laughing and smiled. "I think I'll stay here. Sheriff Cross offered me a position as a security advisor for the town," Claire teased. "And Dr. Emma?" Ethan blushed. "We're getting to know each other." David laughed. "That's great. Emma's a wonderful woman." At last, the pieces of Ethan's life began to fall into place. He found a family, he found love, he found purpose, and most importantly, he found himself. 6 months passed like a dream. Spring arrived in Millbrook. Cherry blossoms bloomed along Main Street. Warm sunlight filtered through the treetops, and the air was filled with the fresh scent of renewal. Ethan now lived in a small house near the park, 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, and a front yard with a climbing rose trellis. Every morning, he went for a jog around the park. Pastor Cole would be watering the plants and wave hello. Mrs. Helen walked her dog and smiled when she saw him. "Good morning, Ethan." He greeted her back, feeling a quiet warmth inside. No more nightmares in the middle of the night. No more jolting awake at sudden noises. The PTSD was slowly easing like the ocean after a storm. The soldier had truly come home, not to the house he once left behind, but to a place where his heart could heal, where the past was forgiven, and where the future lay open. Ethan worked as a security advisor for the town and occasionally taught self-defense classes for children at the community center. The kids adored him. They called him Coach Ethan, listened intently, and practiced every move with serious focus. On Saturday afternoons, Emma would stop by. She brought groceries, and together they cooked dinner. Ethan was still clumsy, cutting tomatoes unevenly, adding too much salt, but Emma laughed and fixed it for him. "You're getting better," she teased. They ate dinner by candlelight, talking about work, about dreams, about the days ahead. One evening, after washing the dishes, they sat on the porch, gazing up at the stars. Emma asked softly, "Do you ever regret staying in Millbrook?" Ethan shook his head. "No. This is where I found myself." Emma smiled. "I'm glad you stayed." They held hands, sitting in peaceful silence. No need for many words. Being together was enough. Bennett Books grew busier with each passing week. David and Claire worked hard, organizing shelves, hosting book clubs, helping customers. Lily was now 2 years old, talking more, curious about everything. "Mummy, what is this book about?" Claire patiently explained, reading aloud to her. Every evening, the family gathered in their cozy living room, reading, playing with blocks, telling fairy tales. They often invited Ethan to dinner. David cooked spaghetti, Claire made salad, and Lily helped set the table. "Uncle Ethan is here." Lily ran out and hugged his legs. Ethan scooped her up, grinning from ear to ear. Ethan had become part of their family not by blood, but through love and a deep, unspoken bond. Lily's second birthday party was held in the Bennett's backyard. Pink and purple balloons decorated the space, the table overflowed with treats, and a princess-shaped cake sat proudly in the center. The guest list was long: Ethan and Emma, Sheriff Cross, Dr. Morgan, Mrs. Helen, Pastor Cole, Jack, Tyler, Preston, Grace, Nurse Diane, Mayor Collins, and dozens of Millbrook residents. Children ran across the lawn, laughter ringing through the air. Adults chatted, sipped lemonade, and enjoyed the food. Lily wore a flared pink dress and a little crown-shaped birthday hat, laughing joyfully as she played with her friends. When it was time to cut the cake, everyone gathered around. David lifted Lily up and helped her blow out the candles. "Make a wish." Lily closed her eyes and blew. 2 candles went out. Applause erupted, and everyone sang, "Happy birthday." David spoke, his voice full of emotion. "6 months ago, our family was on the brink of falling apart. But thanks to Ethan, and thanks to the Millbrook community, we were given a second chance. Thank you, all of you." Claire nodded, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Thank you for loving our family." After the cake, Lily ran over to Ethan, holding a crumpled sheet of paper with a drawing. "Uncle Ethan, I made this for you." Ethan knelt down and took it. The drawing showed a soldier wearing a cap and uniform holding a small baby. Beneath it, Claire had written, "Uncle Ethan, my hero." Ethan stared at the picture, his eyes filling with tears. He hugged Lily tightly. "Thank you, Lily. I'll keep this forever." Lily kissed his cheek. "I love you, Uncle Ethan," he whispered back. "I love you too." Jack, Tyler, and Preston came over, reminiscing about the rescue. Tyler laughed. "Just like the old days on the battlefield." Ethan shook his head. "But this time, we saved a family. No one had to leave." Sheriff Cross patted Ethan on the shoulder. "You changed this town. You made it safer." Dr. Morgan smiled. "And you've changed yourself. You're much healthier now." Mrs. Helen hugged him. "I'm so proud of you." Pastor Cole rested a hand on his shoulder. "God led you home at exactly the right time." As the sun set over Millbrook, golden light washed across the town, warming every house and every street. Ethan sat on the steps, watching Lily play with the other children, her laughter clear and bright, like silver bells. Emma sat beside him, her hand in his. Ethan exhaled softly. "I've found my home." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. "We both have." The soldier had come home, not to the place he once left behind, but to a home where the heart is healed, where love surrounds, where the past is forgiven and the future is welcomed. That is the true meaning of home. Sometimes, when we save others, we are also saving ourselves. Kindness and courage can change lives. Family is not only blood, but love and acceptance. Everyone deserves a second chance. Justice will ultimately prevail, and community has an immeasurable power to heal. As night fell over Millbrook, lights came on in every home, a symbol of hope, of love, of a brighter tomorrow. Ethan West, the soldier who returned, had finally found what he had been searching for all his life: a place to belong, a family to love, and a purpose to live for. The story you have just followed is a work of fiction, but it is inspired by real events that have happened and continue to happen in everyday life. The names of characters, locations, and certain details have been changed to protect the privacy and safety of those involved. However, the emotions, fears, losses, and the journey of rediscovering meaning in life that Ethan, Lily, and the Bennett family experience reflect, with great honesty, what many individuals and families are quietly facing each day. From this story, we can draw several profound lessons about life. First, never be indifferent to the safety and well-being of children. A faint cry, an unusual sign, a moment of hesitation sometimes, these can be the line between life and death. If you see a child in danger or being neglected, take action and seek help immediately. The courage of an ordinary person can save an entire life. Second, kindness has a ripple effect far greater than we often imagine. Ethan did not save Lily to become a hero. He simply did what was right. Yet that single choice saved a family, exposed serious crimes, and brought hope to an entire community. Sometimes, one timely act of compassion can change the course of many lives. Third, a painful past does not define who you are. Ethan carried the wounds of war, haunting memories, and deep feelings of guilt. But he proved that healing is always possible when we allow ourselves to love and protect others. We cannot erase the past, but we can choose who we become from this moment forward. Finally, family is not formed by blood alone, but by connection, sacrifice, and the decision to stay together during the darkest times. Lily survived not merely by chance, but because there were people willing to stand up and protect her, even though they had been strangers to one another before. If this story touched your heart, please consider pressing like to support the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can continue this journey with us through other moving stories. Stories of compassion, redemption, and people who once lost their way but found the path home again. Please share this story with your friends and loved ones. Somewhere out there may be a child in need of protection, a wounded soul in need of hope, or someone searching for a reason to believe that there is still goodness in the world. One shared story can become the beginning of a miracle.